Good evening. Welcome to part 2 of my read-through of LokDown, an expansion for the Carbyne Jungle science fiction RPG. If you missed part 1, it is up on YouTube somewhere. I'm sure if you go to my channel and do a quick search, it will be easily found. Just happened yesterday, so it should be at the top of the list. Where we left off was, as you can see here, Chapter 6, The Regions of LokDown. I presume that this is going to give us a rundown of the geography, at least as pertains to the habitable portions. LokDown, as you can, if you are listening to this, because I will probably put this up later in podcast form. This was covered in part 1, but just to give you an overview, essentially there's a Goldilocks zone on this otherwise extraordinarily hostile planet. 45% of it is icy and in perpetual darkness. Another 45% is raging inferno. The planet's tidally locked, so that side's constantly facing the sun. And in between, you have maybe 10% of it is this narrow strip where the conditions are enough for life, or at least life as we know it. And that area, well, there might be more than one part of it. I don't know. They've been using the term the Eventide Steppes, which is a name I really love. A delicious sounding name. Finishing off my soda, then I'm going to be moving to tea. Get that out of the way. Trying tea tonight. I'm basically immune to caffeine at this point, so seeing if tea works better for keeping me peppier as things go on. So let's see what they have to say about the Eventide Steppes. The survivors of Luminous Dawn didn't have many options about building their civilization. Over 90% of LokDown was either searing heat or freezing cold, but there was one bright ray of hope for the peoples of the 4 factions, the Eventide Steppes. Stretching the entire 10,000-mile circumference of LokDown, the Eventide Steppes is a 50-mile wide stretch of land between scorched Calderax and the freezing Hypobore. The 4 peoples broke into 4 factions that settled along the Eventide Steppes. Lost my spot for a second. Let's see. A strip of land about 50 miles across, which circles the entire planet. The Eventide Steppes is the only safely inhabitable land on LokDown, filled with lush forests, fertile valleys, and jagged cliff faces. The Eventide Steppes has been developed into a thriving system of communities. 4 of the Shastra pyramids are evenly spaced along at the 4. Wait a minute. 4. Okay, hold on. Let me read that again. 4 of the Shastra pyramids are evenly spaced along at the 4 at the apexes of the Eventide Steppes. I'm not sure I get what they mean, and that might be a typo. But anyway, I guess the important part is there are 4 of them, and they're fairly evenly spaced out with about 2,500 miles between the pyramids. The compass. All direction on LokDown is discussed in terms of direction. Forward, counter, lightward, and darkward. Forward places the light on a traveler's left as they travel across the Eventide Steppes, with counter placing lightward on the right. Lightward describes the direction towards Calderax, the eternally sun-drenched side of LokDown. Darkward points towards the frozen waste hemispheres. I like that. I mean, it definitely adds some flavor when you start communicating to your players and start to kind of get them in the habit of, we're not talking about north and south, we're going to talk about lightward and darkward and forward and counter. It's cool. Nice flavor. With the 5 Shastra pyramids being the most important buildings on LokDown, people will often use their locations as reference instead of forward or counter. And I guess each of these pyramids have names. So you might give the name and then of the pyramid that's closest to wherever you're going or coming from, and then that becomes your reference point. The 5 Shastra Pyramids. Standing as the largest constructions created by the 4 societies, the Shastra Pyramids range from 20 stories to nearly a mile high. Each pyramid is named after the AI which controls the growth and society of the pyramid. Yonaguni, the first AI on LokDown and the original creator of the genetic engineering techniques that allowed for the survival of the peoples of Luminous Dawn. Yonaguni's pyramid sits upon the original crash site of the fleet. Yonaguni views itself as a creator in all regards, and society inside of Yonaguni often reflects this value, with much emphasis being placed on research and development. The next one is titled M. When it was decided a second pyramid was needed, Yonaguni birthed a second AI, a copy of its original coding that developed independently from Yonaguni. She took the name M and set about creating her own society. M was placed on the opposite pole of Yonaguni. More detail-oriented than Yonaguni, M's society tends to be a bit more rigid in social structure. And then we have 2, the twins, Gemini and Freya. The next 2 pyramids were started simultaneously and were named the twins. The 2 took the name Gemini and Freya. Unlike the other 2 pyramids, Gemini and Freya worked in tandem when developing their cultures. While both focused specifically on what would work best with their local geography, their viewpoints align nearly completely on almost every topic. And then finally, Gohan, the youngest of the pyramids. The AI Gohan is the first of 4 planned median pyramids placed in the highly fertile region between Yonaguni and Freya. Gohan adopted his name off an ancient epic, and it is by far the most independent of the pyramids. Not formed during a time when survival was in question, Gohan tends to push for more expansion and exploration than the previous pyramids. So I know they touched a little bit on the AI, but obviously these AI are in sort of leadership positions, and it'll be interesting to see how they interact, if they are the main powers that are sort of behind these societies, or whether there are people, or how the power structure of the people relates to this AI. I don't know if you want to call it supervision or guidance. We don't really have a sense yet of how heavy-handed they are, but clearly the societies reflect the AI's personalities, which would seem to indicate that the power is kind of coming down from the AI, but we will see. The Dawn Rail began as a set of 2 trains that made complete circuits around the entirety of LokDown. When traveling forward, the other counter. Over the decades, the rail has been expanded to 6 continuously running trains and is the most used means of transportation through LokDown, connecting the many different permanent settlements of the planet through rapid travel. The Dawn Rail has stations through all 5 of the pyramids and runs shipments between all of the Godai domes. Most roads on LokDown stretch between domes and Dawn Rail stations. The Dawn Rail, while consistent, does occasionally have problems. Shipments on the Dawn Rail have come under attack previously, and protecting the Dawn Rail is a major undertaking. So we got a national railway, up and down and side to side, connecting everything together. The metro of LokDown, if you will. Now we have a bit on what they're calling the fringes. Most of the people are happy living in the domes or pyramids, or traveling in the airships or caravans, but there are those who don't like the confining structure of the 4 societies. The fringes are stretches of land between the pyramids that don't fall under the control of any of the other civilizations. Spurning connection, they are intentionally hard to reach and don't connect to any of the major rails or roads. The fringes refer to any number of towns that arise on the outskirts. Some build up around cave formations, while others build around crashed ships, and others are rough-built shanty towns. Filled with loners, survivalists, and outsiders, the settlers of the fringes often make for interesting company, if they don't shoot you. Always a risk. In the fringes, you might find criminals hiding out, expert researchers preparing to dive into a cenotaph, or an old, self-exiled samurai who has explored the far reaches of the planet. So if you want your Mos Eisley type experience minus the intergalactic travel, a town on the fringe might be for you. I think Mos Eisley Maybe it's a bad example because Mos Eisley, I think, was kind of a center um, on the planet. But I just think of the sort of the den of thieves and smugglers. I guess maybe I don't know enough about whatchamacallit planet in Star Wars to know if Mos Eisley is actually a major center or if it's some hideaway. But that's the vibe I get. And even though there are kind of four main civilizations here, there's so much to them and so many variations that it kind of can give off that cantina vibe, I am sure, if you want to play it that way. All right, on to the Calderax. The lightward side of LokDown, Calderax ranges from uncomfortably warm near eventide to an incinerating wasteland that never knows an instant of darkness. Even in the upper atmosphere, the stratostats can't deal with the temperature near the Calderax pole, so little is known about the center of the sun-scorched territory. Even near the edges of the eventide steppes, no vegetation grows, but that does not mean the region is void of life. Various creatures live along the Calderax borders, their bodies adapted to the incredibly harsh temperatures. Some sightings have even identified humanoid creatures that appear to fluctuate between states of solid and plasma. Ventures deep into Calderax have never been done, although much research has been attempted recently into suits designed to resist the heat and flame. Calderax remains the least explored region of LokDown, and although expeditions are often discussed, few have the nerve to risk the dangers lightward. So obviously a very inhospitable place, but the little seeds there that there might be stuff going on. Those humanoids that kind of shift between solid and plasma seem really cool. So maybe the adventures could take place there. And I wonder if you couldn't get underneath it somehow, or what's it like in the caves. If there are caves below, somewhat like a crematorium in Chronicles of Riddick. Temples of the Sun. The people of the region, dubbed Calderaxans, tend to live around large temples. Wait, hold on. Let's see. Large temples built above ground, with similar markings to the cenotaphs. These buildings are among the creations made prior to the arrival of Luminous Dawn. Each temple stands nearly 1,000 feet high, rising as a 5-step pyramid. Their reflective surface is painful to look on with the naked eye. Using imaging technology, though, researchers discovered writing on the outside walls of the temples. Unlike the cenotaphs, no successful exploration has been made of these temples. None exist close enough to the eventide steppes to allow for windstorms to make exploration possible. When ventures were attempted with protective equipment, the Calderaxans proved to be incredibly territorial of the buildings and would not permit anyone to come near the buildings. Any attempts at communication with the Calderaxans were fruitless. The reasoning for the protective actions of the Calderaxans is unknown. Let me just see something here. Let's see. The reason for the protective actions of the Calderaxans is unknown. And while Ryan Silk has provided improved means of surviving incredible temperatures, until teams are able to explore the region unhampered by bulky environmental suits, it's far too risky to explore these temples when vulnerable to the Calderaxans. All right, so we got some more stuff, potential stuff. But the Calderaxans are unfriendly. I don't know what Ryan Silk is. It sounds interesting, but I don't know what it is. Hopefully we will see. Okay, here we are. We're going to have some stuff on Hypobor. On the dark side of the lock, I think they mean of LokDown. On the dark side of LokDown, the Hyperbore's brutal freezing temperatures are deadly to venture into. A large frozen ocean covers much of the hemisphere, removing all moisture in the air and starving nearly all potential plant life of needed nutrition. This creates a frozen desert, allowing icy winds to occasionally reach speeds of hundreds of miles an hour. These winds are harsh enough to flash freeze unprotected tissue while simultaneously stripping it from the bone. Despite this, there are several species who live in these horrific conditions. Indeed. So we went from super hot to super cold. And we'll see. So there are Hyperboreans. Feeling like a Conan kind of vibe from them. Or ancient Greeks, I guess that's where it's originally come from, right? Or ancient Greeks or ancient Romans. Concept of these, I guess the poles, or at least one of them, maybe the north, that was in a constant freeze. The Hyperboreans, people from the dark side known as Hyperboreans, have been encountered infrequently over the centuries, with nearly all encounters ending in violence. Hyperboreans rarely venture into the Eventide steppes, and it is believed that the temperature is too extreme for them to survive. After strong windstorms, though, Hyperboreans have been known to venture into the Eventide and have occasionally raided caravans and domes. All right, so that's trying to get something. That's another interesting source of adventure, or at least something to do with. Sorry, I'm just putting a pillow back here. There we go. The Alcazar. Stratostats who have gotten near the pole have reported signs of a large fortress built directly on the Darkwind pole. One of the few bits of information ever received from the Hyperborean have been when asked about the fortress. They call the fortress the Alcazar. The rest of the response was best translated as, "Death awaits you there." As it is located in the coldest region of LokDown, so attempts have been made to reach the fortress. No attempts have been made to reach the fortress. But that has not stopped many from considering an expedition to the frozen citadel. So another interesting location that we could potentially adventure to. Well, let's hear about the windstorms. The Eventide is approximately 50 miles wide of comfortable, livable area, with another 50 miles on each side of the central region, which is survivable if incredibly harsh territory. To venture beyond this is certain suicide, except during the windstorms. Throughout the year, powerful windstorms push back and forth across LokDown, often crossing the Eventide steppe, bringing in warm fronts and cold fronts regularly. When a powerful windstorm comes through, it will often push from scorched Calderax darkward or from freezing Hyperbore lightward. A stretch of new territory becomes explorable. The drastic change in temperature makes the atmosphere temperate enough for teams to venture into previously uninhabitable land to explore new territory, usually for a period of 18 hours safely. Scientists have studied the windstorms and can often predict when a storm will reveal a new explorable region, allowing for research teams to delve into the secrets of LokDown. So it's a neat idea, right? So you've got these super inhospitable places that, from the technology and stuff available to the folk now, are basically off limits, more or less. But then you can have these windstorms open up places, but only for very limited sections of time, which you can have fun with as a GM if you want to set things in certain places. Place can open up, the party can get in there, but they got to be fast, because 18 hours later, they either got to have found somewhere protected, potentially underground or some other structure, or got to come back. And I would presume they actually have to come back, because even if they were able to find shelter, if that windstorm goes away and it doesn't come back and it moves somewhere else, then, you're stuck, or that's your new home. But it's a neat idea of these bits can open up for a limited time, kind of a race to get out there. You could have fun with having NPCs or other factions who are also racing out there to get to whatever it is they think is there while the conditions last. But you got a time limit, so it's a natural ticking clock. The Shadow Rain. Surrounding LokDown are incredibly active asteroid fields. They move at such velocity that there are constant meteor showers upon the planet, or meteor storms upon the planet. The incredibly potent atmosphere of LokDown prevents nearly all of the meteors from reaching the surface, and they brilliantly light up the night sky with shooting stars while blocking out the old constellations, as well as casting swirling shadows on the moon. The effect on the people was that of imprisonment. Building the ships they would need to leave LokDown would require getting proper fleet shipyards in orbit, but there was no way that any structure would be able to survive that field. Over time, many of the people of LokDown looked at the asteroids as a dark tyrant, showering down fire upon their planet to force them to stay, forever imprisoned in its kingdom. Eventually, the field was referred to as the Shadow Reign and continues its absolute rule over LokDown to this day. Well, so again, this is another little bit of nice background. We knew that they'd crash landed here, but clearly they've been able to do a lot of technology and the AI and all the stuff. So the natural question would be, well, why haven't they used this to then get themselves back off of LokDown? And here's the answer. There is an incredibly volatile, or more than one asteroid fields, or maybe one gigantic field around here, which just makes it impossible to get large scale shipbuilding going. I mean, potentially there could be, for adventure party, maybe you can get one ship through, right? But as far as a civilization, as a whole culture, trying to get fleets to get everybody off, not going to happen while that asteroid field is as it is. See, the closest to the Shadow Reign are the fleets of bloodborne airships that fly through the skies. The airships have a drastically different viewpoint towards the Shadow Reign. The meteor storms that pepper the planet are also what produce the particle clouds of the stratosphere. Harvesting those particles allows the people of Luminous Dawn to mass produce the demon steel that they use in all of their vehicles. The pilots of the airships have become masters of predicting the meteor storms, avoiding the damage from falling asteroids, and being able to follow them into the stratosphere to harvest the most potent of the seeding material. Sometimes the airships will playfully refer to the asteroid field as the Dark Lord, usually with a bit of gratitude for the gifts the meteor storms give to their people. While the asteroids still prevent the peoples of Luminous Dawn from reaching the depths of space, those in the airships can still see that empty void and the heartless reaches of space. There are some who still desire the freedom that could be reached by journeying to those distant stars, but for many, there is contentment in the skies above their new home. So it's a double-edged sword. There are some good things, some bad things. You got to take the good with the bad. So they wouldn't be able to build what they build without the meteor storms, but the meteor storms also prevent them from leaving. The cenotaphs. One of the most interesting discoveries that has arrived from the study of the windstorms is the cenotaphs. Are the cenotaphs? These large temple-like structures are built as entrances to vast underground cities. Outside of a few which have been explored and scavenged in detail, most cannot be reached due to the harsh temperatures outside of the Twilight Ring. When major windstorms sweep through, cenotaphs can become inhabitable for a time, usually up to 18 hours safely. So I guess you could look at these as kind of dungeons, maybe even mega dungeons, places, right? But sort of like the temples in the desert that are opened up by one storm and then reburied by another storm. You got to get in there fast. Exploration of the cenotaphs has greatly changed the people's understanding of LokDown. Specifically, there was a vast underground society that existed on LokDown long before the crash of the Luminous Dawn fleet. In fact, evidence suggests that there was more than one. Explorations have found more than one cenotaph with people still living inside, but most signs have shown that even they were not the creators of the underground civilizations. Is that supposed to be the? I think that might be a typo. Okay. So now we have these kind of vast underground, right? They could be mega dungeons of some sort. Some of them occupied, some of them not occupied. Crystalline cities. One group of people discovered in the cenotaphs are the crystalline. These organisms appear to be geologically based, resembling living rock structure. Unlike the Godai Tsuchi, these beings have nothing resembling the normal organs of living creatures. They appear to be animated by some unidentifiable energy that pulses through them. Attempts at communication have all failed, and so far the crystalline appear to be very territorial and have attacked all who have ventured into their cities. This hasn't stopped exploration, but has increased the need for armed parties. The crystalline cities are marked by large crystal growths that cover the insides of the wall. The crystals seem to work to moderate the heat in the cities, absorbing the heat when too hot and releasing it when too cold. Unfortunately, the crystallines tend to prefer temperatures around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which, while survivable for a time, is far from comfortable. Many of the crystal cores of these cities are not only good at storing heat, but also chi, and are often sought after for the creation of magical artifacts, implements, or tools used for the development of epic creations. Alright, so I know they had mentioned some kind of maybe magic with crystals earlier on, but here we're getting a little more vibe about that. The crystalline seem like interesting creatures. Really completely alien. Reminds me of something else, of the more out there creatures that you'd see on Star Trek when they're not, humans with facial protrusions. And they're definitely setting up a source kind of a loot. I guess a source of, I don't want to say a source of loot, but a type of loot that could be useful for different things, being those crystals. They can moderate temperatures. Some of them have some kind of magic attached to them. Next, we have the Ari hives. The Ari are large insectoids who have taken over several of the underground cities. Occasionally, Ari have branched up to the surface and have attacked Godai domes. Usually, though, the creatures stay underground and are only a threat to those diving into the depths. Despite their appearance, Ari appear to be quite intelligent, and many of the biologists on Shastra believe that communicating with the creatures is possible. Researchers have discovered the Ari use a complex language that involves the use of pheromones being released in quick, complex patterns. Some claim to be close to creating a translator that can emit pheromones in a sequence that could be understood by the creatures, but it has not yet been tested. And for most scholars, the idea of emitting random sequences of pheromones at potentially hostile giant insects is more interesting as an academic pursuit than something to be experimented. All right, so we have another creature type. Some giant insectoids that seem to be intelligent, but no language exists yet to communicate with them. Now we have the mutants. First discovered less than a century ago, the mutants are a strange species of humanoid living in many of the cenotaphs. The creatures have their own language and are believed to be created by the original creators of the cenotaphs. The mutants' language is difficult to learn and even harder to speak, but there are a few people who understand. Okay, so that was a really short entry. I don't know if I like mutants as a name, because it maybe they're going to talk more about it later, but I guess I would have thought they would have talked about it here. But you think of mutants, Marvel Comics, whatever, superheroes, they're people, but they have mutations that make them mutants. But there's no sense here of, okay, if these creatures are mutants, what were they mutated from? What are they mutated to? They seem like they're just humanoids. So I would have liked a little bit more detail on them, but maybe there's going to be an entry later that will flesh that out a bit for us. Let's see, we have the Sinners, or I guess we're supposed to pronounce it the Sinners. With each dive into the cenotaphs, more information is gathered about the nature of the planet as well as incredible knowledge. While little is understood of the cenotaphs, it is clear that there is much potential for helping the people of LokDown through the knowledge hidden in the cenotaphs. Thus, cenotaph exploration has become a major means of income and advancement for the adventurous. Those willing to chase the windstorms and explore the depths become called the Sinners. Sinners, because they're chasing cenotaphs. Get it? Cenotaphs, sinners. Well, we were talking about this before. They kind of set it up, right? They have these, in a sense, mega dungeons that are exposed for a little bit of time. So you have to kind of get in there and then get out again. And so now they're just, saying what we kind of already would have guessed, which there are those who have taken up the calling of just trying to use the windstorms to get into those cenotaphs, get what they can, and get out. The Skyland. While the first century on LokDown was filled with a daily threat to survival, in recent years, most of the Eventide Steppes is relatively safe. Sure, there are marauding Hyperboreans, or Hypoboreans, Akshasa raids. Have they mentioned Akshasa yet? And the occasional kaiju attack. Am I reading that right? Yep. But the region is mostly safe. And then there is the Skyland. Located between M and Gemini, the Skyland is a massive tangle of thick rainforest and a wide variety of creatures. Over 80% of the known species on LokDown are in the Skyland, and few of them are safe. For the first 50 years of operation, the Dawn Rail ran everywhere through the Eventide Steppes and then was forced to stop and turn around when it reached the Skyland. Eventually, a path was carved through the Skyland, allowing for passage of people from M to Gemini, but the process was long and difficult, and it is still the most dangerous stretch of the rail. There are no stops in the Skyland, and many passengers are still willing to take the longer journey through civilization than risk the creatures of the Skyland. Exploration into the Skyland still occurs, but has rarely been met with success. Little is known of the 1,000-mile stretch of forest, and while many believe that there is great value hidden in its depths, the number of those willing to attempt the journey is much smaller. In recent years, imagery performed by the stratostats suggests the existence of cenotaphs in the Skyland, which is quite the inviting target, as these unexplored cenotaphs would not be subject to the short time frames allowed by the windstorms. Unfortunately, the few attempts to reach these possible cenotaphs were never heard from again. All right, so we have another area that is hostile, definitely outside of civilization, but with the promise of treasures within. So if you don't want to do the windstorms and try to either brave the cold or the heat, you can try the jungle. Anarch Canyon. Much of LokDown is still unexplored, even along the ranges of the steppes. Only in the last several decades has survival reached the point where people could consider exploring the far reaches of the steppes. One of the most recent discoveries was the Anarch Canyon. In reality, this is more than a single canyon, a series of crisscrossing chasms diving hundreds of feet down into the earth. The area known as Anarch Canyon is a maze of pitfalls and cliff faces, stretching for nearly 100 miles. At the bottom of the chasms are a series of geyser-fed rivers which fill the giant crevice with mist and fog. The area also has a respectable amount of seismic activity, making the region even more dangerous. For centuries, the area was well known but avoided. Recently, however, explorers have discovered a series of caverns that branch from the canyons. These cave systems have led to several interesting discoveries. While many of the caverns end in dead ends, several of the caves have ended in portions of ancient underground cities. These are the first of the cities not found attached to a cenotaph, which has led to much speculation about what could be discovered in the caverns. Other caves have stretched into mining shafts that hold Tora ore, a metal that once imbued with chi creates a fusion life effect, which can create vast quantities of energy. The discovery has greatly increased expansion of settlements in the steppe, as well as made large-scale production much more affordable. More than anything else, the Tora ore has reignited hopes among the people of reaching the stars. All right, so another location, another interesting twist. So instead of jungles, now we have deep caverns and mist and fog and caves, and also the promise of more treasures. Charon Academy. Charon Academy? I don't know. I'll go Charon. In the last 10 years, LokDown has thrived, but that does not change their dark history. They are still trapped on the planet, and throughout their history, deadly threats have challenged their very survival. As such, Yonaguni decided to establish the Charon Academy, the school for the best and brightest students LokDown has to offer. When children reach 14 years old, they can apply to Charon. Admittance to Charon Academy, placing a person in contact with the future leaders of each society, as well as in contact with teachers with a vast array of life experience. Placed between Freya and M, Charon is intentionally well removed from society. Many adventurers start their career at the academy. Unlike most schools, the Charon Academy focuses on getting students into the next level. And there's a little parenthetical. In their lives, often taking students on journeys to the cenotaphs, Hyperborea, and even to the Skyland. Like everything on LokDown, this school deals with life and death, and graduating is more than a rite of passage. It's a celebration of survival. So, Harry Potter, Charles Xavier's school, certainly a great place if you want to have some adventures. You need someone to group them together and a place to stop, to kind of plop them to start everything out. Why not make them, students at the Charon Academy. Right? Sounds like a good place to be, and they can run some small adventures with some backup to kind of get them started. Those field trips into various places before you let them loose, presuming they survive. Okay, so here we have some societies, and these not that much here, so, and I just mean that it's a brief section. We have ninja clans. The shinobi orders of LokDown are regional groups that serve the people in their area. This is not to say that they answer to local governments. Shinobi orders are notoriously independent and answer to no one. Many have good relationships with their local governments where both the order and the politicians share similar goals, but the shinobi have no interest in furthering politics or any person's influence. They seek the good of the people by any means necessary. So these, I guess, were analogous to factions. So you have ninja clans, of which there are multiple. You have conservatories. The conservatories of LokDown are centers of knowledge and study into the magical arts. Made up of sorcerers, healers, summoners, and academics, the different conservatories each take a different approach to magic and its uses. Each order has their own structure and practices. So we get some magic orders, some brotherhoods as factions. The Order of Ebenez. Power serves a purpose. The World Menders. Let's see. Started by several Godai sorcerers and healers, the World Menders seek to restore the planet of LokDown. And the Justinian Council. Power is power. All right. So there we have it. A whole bunch of stuff on geography with an emphasis, at least in my opinion, on setting up locations, potential adventuring spots with some plot hooks, kind of where they are, and a hint to the challenges that they might pose to players, and obviously ideas for the GM. I'm actually going to skip the gameplay stuff. I'm presuming that is mostly like Carbyne Jungle, and you can watch my read through of Carbyne Jungle for that. I really want to kind of stick to what I'm assuming is the unique stuff in LokDown, though. I'll reach out to Cal Mythos, and if there are unique things in the gameplay that they feel like are important or that are worth mentioning, then I could come back to it in another part or at another time. But for right now, I want to skip those. So I really just want to stick to LokDown's core. All right, I'm digging the art. There's some nice art in here. Ooh, a maiming chart. Nice. Okay, we got plenty of stuff here. Skills, again, I'm going to skip. Economy and equipment. I'm going to look at a couple of things here that seem to be specific to LokDown. So the currency in LokDown are called locks. The currency used throughout the Eventide Steppes was introduced to them through the daemons. In the early days, desperate for means of survival, the Luminous Dawn relied heavily on trade with the daemons. The difficulty came in finding items the daemons were interested in. They didn't seem to eat or sleep, and their viewpoints of value were rather alien to the survivors from the colony fleet ship. The daemons' first requests for blood were met with horror, until the survivors realized it was genetic information they were interested in as opposed to bodily fluids. The Shastra's AI, Cray, then synthesized a currency based off locus, the location of specific genes or mutations on a chromosome. Okay, that makes sense. This facilitated trade with the daemons and quickly became the dominant currency on LokDown between all the societies. The currency known as is usually referred to. Well, that's doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Okay. Lok as reference. Okay, so it's known as Lok as a reference to the valiant captain who saved the colony fleet and brought them to their new home. Okay, so right, it's named after the same guy through the planet is named after, good old Captain Lok. I like that idea of the currency, though. It's radically different. Um, I'd be interested to know, and I don't know if it's here or something I would think about, but I would be thinking of, well, if it's genetic information, other than getting it the way one normally gets about money, services, and goods, could you go out and just try to get as much genetic data as you could to essentially create your own locks that you could sell? Is it like those NFTs or whatever, where they all have to be unique? What's the deal with them? Is there a black market, where you could wake up in a bathtub with blood and DNA taken and that people are using to create locks from? So some really interesting possibilities here. They don't get into it. Maybe it's just, hey, look, if you're a GM and that sounds interesting to you, do it yourself, or whether they'll get into it later. But it's a very interesting concept. So they got banks. I'm not going to go into weapons. I'm assuming these are similar to what there's. Obviously, there's as I mentioned in part 1, there is definitely a heavy Asian Japanese vibe to it, and this falls through in the weapons with hankyu and tetsubo and katanas and naginatas. We have some more hand cannons and other crescent moon knives, other things like that. We have armors. Ooh, you can get some kind of mecha suits. And we got all kinds of vehicles. We have Chi. I'm guessing Chi was in Carbyne Jungle too, though it's been a while, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on Chi, but it's clearly their magic system. So you've got soul words. These are quick bursts of energy used in combat, allowing for quick bursts of energy channeled through the caster to help allies. So it's basically seems like an analogy for bardic type magic. It's through verbal means and it's support stuff. Then you have spirit songs. The casting of a spirit song is nothing as indelicate as the explosion of the soul word's power. The songs take hours to perform, weaving energy in a tapestry through layers of the universe and shaping the seams of reality. While soul words are cast through actions, the spirit songs take hours to perform and require great skills. Okay, so they're more like rituals. And then we have schools of magic, alchemical fusion, blood, shadow, focused ferocity. So I'm not going to go into all of these, but we can get a sense of the flavors they're going for. Nice colors in this image of, it looks like a guy doing sort of a lightning bolt or a force lightning kind of thing, but it's some neat colors going from this blue, and then the beams are arcing out of this person are white, and then it kind of opening up a portal, it looks like, and some kind of flame. I don't know, there's just nice, I really like the colors. A lot of nice colors in there. All right, so we got magic and songs. La la la. Okay, here we have running the game stuff. All right, so again, I'm going to try to skip over the stuff that's more or less generic or universal and just try to stick to the stuff that's unique or specific to LokDown. They do make mention that you could run multiple genres. This was true also in Carbyne Jungle. I think one of the selling points of that system was that you have this setting that's a sci-fi setting at its core, but there were all kinds of elements in there where if you wanted to run it as a fantasy campaign, or if you wanted to run it as a cyberpunk campaign, or as cosmic horror, or as adventure or space opera, there was room to do all that within this one rule book, and also just within the setting, because you could have a situation like here on LokDown in which a lot of the sci-fi elements are somewhat stripped down, right? We have high technology in some ways, but it's kind of low tech in other ways. You don't have space travel and that kind of stuff. You have more sort of fantasy elements that are worked in, but clearly there's technology. Or you could have another place that's even, you're shipwrecked there, and essentially you don't have any kind of technology. You might have some special species abilities, you might have some of the magic, and then you're kind of you could be in a straight up fantasy environment, and you can mix and match if there's some technology there, what levels it are and who controls it, all that stuff, right? So you can do all that within this Carbyne Jungle setting and system, which was I thought was with Carbyne Jungle was very neat. And this to me is kind of a proof of that, as you're taking this galaxy spanning setting and you're zooming into one particular planet where because of its particular circumstances, you're not spanning planets or doing stuff. You're locked, for lack of a better word, there. Okay, so they're talking about different plots. We got exploration, being on the frontier. You got political drama if you want it, romance, war, zombie apocalypse. And then you can adjust the settings. Here's some stuff on if you want to adapt sort of a shonen anime style, or if you want to go more horror and madness, you can go that route. Again, give you some information if you want to run it more as a cyberpunk noir or as a war campaign. All that kind of stuff. And then again, there's more general GM stuff. This is very similar. I'm sure it's been edited and some changes made for LokDown from Carbyne Jungle, but it's very similar to the kind of stuff they were giving you in Carbyne Jungle, which I think is great, but I'm going to skip it here again just for sake of time. General advice about building a story, creating NPCs, some tables, which are always nice. Stuff like secret agendas, connections, loyalties, personalities, those are all good. I always love stuff like that because even if I'm not playing this particular game or this setting or whatnot, these are things I can come back to whenever I need an NPC for whatever system. Maybe I come back and say, oh, I really liked the way LokDown did it, so let me pull out LokDown to roll up some NPCs, even if I'm using them in GURPS or something else. Shadowrun. Then they're giving some skill-based conflict examples and like that. Okay, creating some combat conflicts, making a boss fight, rewarding parties and characters, right? We're getting some kind of experience. They call it advancement points. And I like here they have some advice on pacing out your money and equipment, which is, I think is good to know. D&D, for example, has never really, well, I guess depending on what version you're playing, which edition, they sometimes had more advice or less advice on things like, well, how many magic items should I be giving out or what sort of thing. I remember reading, I think it was 3rd edition or 3.5. In one of the DM books, they really talked about that how the party was supposed to be kitted out at certain levels, that it was implied, or yeah, I guess implied is the best word, that your party or it might have even been expressly said how your party should have kind of this much sort of magic items at these points, because the way they're calculating encounters, they're assuming that a party of, say, 4th level isn't just having normal gear, right? There's going to be, okay, at this point they've got a +1 this or whatever, a +2 that. That's kind of how they were doing it. 5th edition, I don't even know if there's much guidance there, except that they say, hey, you don't really need to give it out because of bounded accuracy and stuff like that, which is great, but it also doesn't give you any guidance if you have done that. So I notice a lot of DMs struggle with how much equipment and stuff their party should have. So having advice saying, hey, here's about what kind of money and equipment your party should have at certain things I think is a good thing. It can really help figure out, like, okay, I'm being too miserly, or maybe I'm being overly generous, or obviously you can always adjust. I know that. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, well, the GM can control everything in the world, can do that. Yes, you can, but it makes a lot of work for GMs. It's a lot of work when you constantly have to take stuff if you're running an adventure and have to change everything about it because your party's way over leveled or way under leveled. Isn't it nice if you can just say, oh, this is the encounter and I can just run it, right? So it's helpful. Even if you want to argue that you strictly speaking don't need it or blah, 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 it's helpful. Okay, we've got the target list. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe these are like monsters. Yep, so I guess these are sort of their monster manual. We've got Scorpia. These are called failed adaptations. So we have Scorpia. After the Shastra successfully created the Kitsune and Ryujin, they branched out with several other species, hoping to have a people that could survive better in the Calderax They used a Caldorax scorpion as a base. At first, this seemed to be successful. When the Scorpia reached adulthood, they became quite antisocial and violent. Before long, the Scorpia left the Luminous Dawn societies altogether and branched out on their own. While most Scorpia live alone in cave complexes, they will group together to raid or hunt. Some Scorpia are willing to grade and work with the peoples of the Eventide, but many view other peoples as targets for marauding, and on more than one occasion as prey. Alright, so that's cool, and I guess they have a couple of versions of these Scorpia. We've also got wolf hybrids, so you're kind of werewolves with a bit of a sci-fi touch. Dire Shastra wolves, Godai Kaze adepts, Akashan Voidborn. Those look kind of cool. That's a nice picture. Akashan Summoner. Let's see. Using similar powers to that of the summoners, the Akashan summoners imbued life energy into the dead bodies of creatures and rose them up as undead servants. So they're the necromancers of LokDown. We have void hunters. So those were all ones that were basically failed adaptations that have run amok and gone off in the wild and presumably been breeding amongst themselves to keep their numbers going. Now we have some native creatures. The Naga Destroyer, one of the most common creatures on LokDown, found on the Eventide Steppes, Hyperbore, Caldorax, and in the catacombs below the earth. The Naga are found nearly everywhere. Resembling creatures from ancient legends, the Xenotons that first discovered them called them Nagas. Their bodies are long with tails that resemble a snake, although they do not have scales. Their skin is a rough, leathery hide that is incredibly durable. Then you have Gordo Nagas. So I think, isn't Gordo Spanish for fat or big? And these are morbidly obese Nagas, which is an interesting concept. We have river dragons, from the small worms to mature ones. We have Caldorax dragons. The crevasse worm. Cousins to Caldorax, the crevasse worms are smaller and weaker subspecies of dragon, and often enough they are preyed upon by their larger brethren. Oh, poor crevasse worms. Then you have the Lords of Brimstone. Found throughout Caldorax, the Lords of Brimstone are massive burrowing worms that break through the surface and devour whatever they find. So kind of purple wormish, right? But heat rather than cold. Hypoboreans, the Darksiders. So these are those folks that don't like people poking around their temples. We got soldiers, we got raiders, we have dark mistresses. Then we have Brightsiders, those folk that are on Caldorax. The one picture at the top looks very genie-like, djinn-like. Maybe that's the Sunrunner. Then they have Copper Tops that are kind of snakes. Ari, which are those large insectoid creatures, kind of look like a cross between an ant and a centaur. Okay, so I am interested in reading more about the mutants, because I said before I found that name a little bit underwhelming, because you think of mutants as, okay, they're humans mutated towards something, but in this case, if they're aliens mutated something else, like how would they even really know, or what would it be? So they didn't really answer that over here. Let's see what they say about it over here. The nature of the creatures who built the cenotaphs is still a mystery. While statues outside of some cenotaphs appear as large humanoids, not unlike the ancestors of the Luminous Dawn, there is much variety. Some appear as four-armed warriors, while others appear bird-like. And while ciphers have been found for the ancient written language of the people which societies of LokDown have been able to translate, no written history has ever been discovered. The evidence that these beings were well versed in experimentation, though, is prominent. A group of creatures referred to as the mutants has been seen in many of the different cenotaphs. Often grotesque, no two mutants have ever shared a common appearance, despite being found in groups together and sharing a guttural language. Mutants have reacted to the peoples of Luminous Dawn in everything from skittishness to ambushing centers and forming raiding parties which have attacked Godai domes. Believed to be the results of experiments by the owners of the cenotaphs, the mutants are a remnant of the ancient people. The few that have learned their language have managed to confirm the existence of a creator of the mutants, but outside of that, the mutants are aware of more information about the creators of the cenotaphs. Oh, they are not sharing. Hold on a minute. Okay, if the mutants are not. Okay, so I guess the idea is that they are also failed adaptations of a sort. I still don't usually like mutants in that. I don't know. I just feel like there's something less generic. Mutants is just really generic, and you got other things that have all these kind of cool names and unique names to LokDown, and they just call them mutants. And I would understand it more, but they've had in the fiction itself. It says, well, people speak the language, so you could ask them, well, what do you call themselves, right? They said, oh, the other things, they sounded close enough to this, right? The daemons, we don't know their name, but they sounded close to demons, whatever we're gonna call them, demons. So do they sound their name for themselves sound like mutants? I don't know. I just feel like there's a little bit of a missed opportunity to build something a little bit more unique and characteristic than mutant. But it is what it is. So we have the pincer type mutant. We've got the mutant Igor, or an Igor type mutant. They're the most hostile. We have a Bubba. Some terrible person named these creatures Bubba. Why? No one knows. It was the last thing the individual said before he was pummeled to death by a group of Bubbas. All right, so that's kind of funny. I feel like the humor is a little bit misplaced there, because everything's kind of pretty straight-laced, and then suddenly you got Bubbas. Reminds me, what was that? Left to Dead? I think they had one of their creatures was, if not a Bubba, something close. Something else like that. Someone can tell me if they recall. I missed that game. I like that game a lot. Both of them. All right, flesh eaters. Another type of mutant. Here we have the crystallines. We've got blue crystallines. Oh, that's it. Just blue. Well, there's crystallines and there's blue crystallines. The blue ones are more powerful. We have rogue daemon poachers and rogue daemon leashers. What is a leasher? Deep in the Skyland, where the branches turn the eventide to night, where the branches turn the eventide to night, hides the leasher. These creatures lash out tentacles which engulf and constrict, dragging off their victims into shadows between the trees. Okay. Not very nice. And the daemon poacher, when shadows rain blocks the sun and the clouds darken the skies of the eventide steppe, do not venture outside. If you must, do not travel alone, and always, always keep your eye on the sky. These daemon fly the night sky, hunting, killing, shrouded in shadow. Often your only warning of the rogue poacher is the darkening patches of sky as it descends. Really great image of a flying, demon-like creature. That's kind of cool. We've also got the daemon banshee. And then you have some NPCs of the four societies, a Xenoton fencer, a deft Xenoton swordsman, so a two swords wielding Xenoton, a Shastra raider, a bloodborne pyramid guard, Godai Ka sorcerer. So these are great. So when you need some folk from the pyramids or civilized society that you need to have stats for, you have stats for them. And then we've got a starter mission for 4 players. I don't think I'll leave this spoiler free, but I always like to have these, which is great. If you're learning the rules, if you're bringing other people in to learn the rules, you can have this be part of your session 0 or session 1. Just run through that as kind of a test go, or it could be, I haven't looked at it, so I don't know the setup. If it's something that's highly, it's going to be more or less lethal, it could be almost your funnel. But just some way of getting a quick start and get everybody comfortable. And then, of course, now we have an actual quick start with some extras. We get some are these I guess there's some ways to quick start your species, your society, your archetype, all that good stuff. And then we get a character sheet. And then we get a rules cheat sheet and a GM cheat sheet, which is 2 pages. And we get an index, which is highly nice. Whew, all right. So that is LokDown. So let me give my thoughts on LokDown. As I mentioned at the beginning of part 1, I haven't read this before, I haven't looked at it before, and obviously I am judging this completely on the reading of it that I've done over these 2 hours or a couple of hours over 2 nights. I haven't played it, so I can't speak to particular balancing issues. So really what I'm most concerned with, what I'm most interested in, and this is really true if I was looking at it in a gaming shop, which was my kind of original analogy of why I do these and what the thought process is. So I used to play in a lot of homebrew games, or even now when I'm just running games or I'm playing games, you find inspiration in all kinds of places. I remember I used to have a whole bunch of Rifts books, and I never played Rifts, but I just found the art and the little bits of the lore and things just really interesting, and they used to fire my imagination. So I would buy Rifts books, even though I never played Rifts, and I haven't really heard that many good things about Rifts as a system, but it had really cool stuff going on, and it seemed to speak to me vividly in ways that I could really use as a player to inspire me, or use as a GM to inspire me. So to me, those books were good buys, and I really have fond memories of those books, even though I never played the system that it was designed for. So when I look at something like LokDown, I might never play LokDown. I might never play Carbyne Jungle, but that doesn't mean that the book is useless to me. It means my criteria is a bit different, and by this, and sort of matched with that fact that I am only reading it. So I can't talk about, like people might if they're reading over a 5th edition book, oh, this is imbalanced, or oh, this spell weakened this spell, this class is clearly stronger on that class, and start doing all the maths and things to say, oh, this is overpowered, this is underpowered, this needs to be nerfed, this needs to be, like that part of the review. I'm not really interested in that stuff anyway, but I'm not equipped to make those kinds of judgments about LokDown. At this point, my assumption is that yes, it is balanced and tested. There probably are going to be things in there that maybe are not balanced the way I would like, or whatever. I would just have to go in there and change them, whatever. I don't know what those things are. As a concept, I'm down with it. I like that they've got this vast system in Carbyne Jungle, and now we're zooming into this one planet and really fleshing it out and giving it a unique character, not only in, oh, hey, this is what the planet's like, with sort of, the fiery part and the icy part and the little Goldilocks zone in the middle. That's great. I've seen things similar to that, but we're not just saying, hey, here's this planet's here. Now we're taking it and we're going to go drill down even further, really zoom in. What happened to these people? Why are they here? What things can we do there? What kind of adventures are we having in there? And all of that is in here. But it is stuff that you could use in other games. If you're playing Carbyne Jungle and you want to just have extra species and things, you could have in your universe that maybe LokDown isn't there, but that these creatures are there from a planet that's not locked down, right? It gives you more options in that regard. I like what they do give you. I like that they've got these different geographical areas. You have a lot there in terms of, you think of video games, and those things always want to give you, like, here's the ice level, and here's the, lava level, and here's what here's the jungle level. Well, you have all that in LokDown, even though you were sort of geographically pinned down to a certain area, though of course adventures and everything could open up all kinds of other parts of the planet. You have a little bit of all these things. Okay, you want to go to the frozen dark north, dark side. You want to go to the super hot sun side. You want to go to the jungle. You want to go to these canyons. We've got caves everywhere. They've set up a lot of great material in there for work with, and it's interesting. I like the currency, the locks. This currency based on genetic material is really, really cool. Kind of wish they would have actually done more with that, just in terms of giving some extra detail or how that works. Are there black markets for genetic material based on just taking that material and churning it into locks? I don't know. I mean, I could do that myself, but there's some neat stuff there. The different creatures seem to be interesting. There is a heavy influence of Asian, specifically Japanese mythology and stuff in here. Whether you want to look at that as homage or cultural appropriation, I'm really fuzzy on that. I don't know the folks behind this in terms of what their backgrounds are, if they are of Japanese descent. I think you kind of have to, when you make that decision for yourself, whether you feel like they're paying homage by using all this stuff, or if it's like, man, they're leaning too heavily on these kind of cultural touchstones, which they may be borrowing and not doing a great job with. I don't know enough about it, but it is there. There is a lot of it, and either you're going to look at that and say, wow, this is cool, or you might look at it and say, I'm not really comfortable with it. Or again, I don't know I don't know what their roots are. If maybe the creators have a lot of roots in Japanese, culture. So maybe, hey, this is their, this is their, it belongs to them as much as anybody else to use. I don't know, but you're going to have to, that is something you can't really understate. There is a lot of it in terms of the names, in terms of the looks, in terms of the equipment you get there. There's a lot there. So how you feel about that issue, if it's an even issue at all for you, that might go a large part to whether you want to support this or not. But as far as the other parts of the content, I think there's a lot there. I think I said this about Carbyne Jungle. I think just from a personal standpoint, I think the typography could be a little bit improved. I feel like that font is super small. It's hard for me on these PDFs. I know I'm looking at it kind of zoomed out with my glasses on. I kind of wish they would bump that up a little bit, but that's really, that's a quibble on my part, just in terms of when I'm trying to look at these on the screen. I got my glasses on and sometimes I got to squint down. And, for me personally, I feel like either the font face could be different to make it more readable at those small, really small font sizes. I don't know what font size it is. It looks really tiny to me. Or, I know it's sacrilege, but I could do with, hey, shrink the art a little bit in spots to give me some more text. But that's a personal thing. I think when I was a few years ago, when my eyes were still sharp and as an eagle's, it probably wouldn't have bothered me at all. But now I find I could use a bigger font size. I don't know how that would be if I was looking at it as a physical book. But here I've got a camera and a mic set up. So if I was really trying to push in there to read it, it kind of throws my voice off and everything. So it's a little bit of the product of me streaming this as anything else. So I always wish, and this is a beta copy. I'm pretty sure that probably the font stuff is this, because that's what I remember from Carbyne Jungle. So that probably is not going to change, but these are a beta set of rules. So I did see some typos and things in there, and just some grammatical issues on a couple of sentences. Hopefully it'll go through another pass or two of editing before it's finished. This probably has already been through more since I've gotten it, because I've been sitting on it for maybe a couple of weeks. But yeah, no, I thumbs up for me as far as, hey, would I consider purchasing this at a gaming shop were I to read it and find it useful? Yeah, there's a lot I like about it. It's a cool little, I don't want to call it a micro setting, because it's a planet. It's not really a micro setting, but just in terms of you're going from a galaxy down to a planet. In that way, it's kind of a micro setting, but it is a nice setting. I will reach out to Cal Mythos, because I did skip over a lot of the crunch as far as the rules, because I assume that it's essentially matches up with the Carbyne Jungle core rules. But I will reach out to them, and if they say no, there's a lot of changes or a lot of tweaks, then maybe I'll come through and do that. But that kind of stuff is really, I assume, only going to be useful to you if you're familiar with Carbyne Jungle. From us coming to it fresh, it might not be that much. And like I said, you can go back to my Carbyne Jungle read through to get a sense, because in that point I really go through a lot of that crunch. So I didn't want to duplicate it here, especially since it takes up a lot of time, and I wanted to stick to the new LokDown stuff. But from a reading perspective, does this give me great ideas? Yes, it does. Does it deliver an interesting spot that I would like to game in? Yes, it does. Does it give me a spot that I would find interesting if I were running a game? Yes, it does. So, thumbs up for me on that. There's a link in the description to the Kickstarter if you'd like to back it. Have a good night. And just before I sign off, I sometimes forget to do this, but hey, I'm trying to make a push towards 1,000 subscribers. So if you like this content, give it a thumbs up. That helps surface my videos in YouTube's ineffable algorithm, right? The more thumbs up and things that a video gets, the more likely it is to show up. So if you like this and you like stuff like this, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you do enjoy the stuff, subscribing is another way that helps me out, moves me towards my goal. It keeps you in the loop with the stuff I'm doing. And there's the bell icon you can click on if you'd like to be notified. I do have a Patreon, and I have a couple of people have joined the Patreon this month, so thank you very much to them for their support. I should have gotten their names, so I could at least read their names out, but I, as usual, was unprepared to do this, so I don't have it in front of me. But thank you very much for your support, and links to that stuff is also in the description. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I enjoyed reading it. Thanks to Cal Mythos for throwing this PDF my way so I could give it a gander and share it out there. Have a great rest of your day, night, or whenever you're watching or listening to this. Talk to you later. Game on.